Breaking news if y'all haven't been watching the news or looking at your phone, news reports, whatever. Because what happened today in Minneapolis, this is not just about one shooting. It's been consistently about power, accountability, and trust. And when federal authority oversteps, this damage goes far beyond just this one moment. If you're not caught up, let me give you a brief synopsis. Today, a U.S. citizen was shot and killed during a federal immigration enforcement operation in Minneapolis. A CBP, which is a Custom and Border Protection officer, fired the fatal shots. Federal officials says it was self-defense. State investigators say they were denied access to the scene. And right now, the facts are still unfolding. But even before all the facts are finalized, there is something we must talk about because this moment exposes a growing fracture between federal enforcement and the American public. So, let's be clear and responsible first. Here's the facts. A federal agent fired a weapon. A U.S. citizen is dead. Federal agency says the shooting was justified. State investigators say they were blocked from immediate access. Body camera footage may or may not exist, and no charges have been announced at this time. That's not speculation. That's what's publicly reported. What we do not have yet is a full independent reconstruction of events, transparency, shared evidence, and public confidence that accountability will be neutral and fair. And that gap right there between authority and transparency is where trust begins to erode. Here's something that gets lost in moments like this. Federal agents are not above the Constitution. Yes, they operate under federal authority. Yes, they do face real danger. Yes, self-defense is legally protected. But the Fourth Amendment still applies. Deadly force is only constitutional when there is an imminent threat of death or seriously bodily harm. Not fear, not assumption, and not convenience. And here's the key issue, y'all. When federal agents act in ways that appear unaccountable, they weaken the very authority they were trying to enforce. Because power without transparency doesn't produce safety at all. It just produces fear. Now, trust is not optional in law enforcement. It's operational. When people believe federal agents can operate without local oversight, or state investigators can be locked out, or evidence can be controlled by the same agency under scrutiny, the public stops asking, was this justified? And they do start asking, who's protecting us from the protectors? That's not anti-law enforcement. That's pro-accountability. And you cannot demand public cooperation while refusing to be publicly transparent. And let's be clear here. This is not just about one city. It's across the country. Federal agencies are expanding operations, immigration enforcement is increasingly visible, and communities are already. Now, when federal agents are perceived as occupying forces instead of public servants, you don't get compliance. You get resistance. And resistance does not come from ideology alone. It comes from broken trust. Now, let's understand. Accountability doesn't mean assuming guilt. What it does mean is we welcome scrutiny. If you haven't noticed, or you need to know this is what re-accountability looks like. Independent investigations, shared access with evidence, clear public explanations, body cameras always, cooperation with state authorities, not obstruction, because if an officer acted lawfully, transparency protects them too. Silence protects no one. And when federal agents from the U.S. Custom and Border Protection and related DHS agencies were in Minneapolis as part of a large federal immigration enforcement operation, not because of local policing, but because of broader federal crackdown ordered by the Trump administration. And here's what reliable reporting and publicly documented sources has explained. This is Operation Metro Surge, which is a nationwide immigration enforcement campaign. The presence of CBP, ICE, and DHS agents in Minneapolis is part of this formal federal operation known as Operation Metro Surge. It's an Trump administration immigration enforcement campaign involving massive numbers of agents in Minnesota, focusing on arresting and deporting undocumented immigrants and investigating alleged immigration-related offenses. Now, targeted immigration enforcement actions during this operation, according to the Border Patrol and DHS, this includes apprehending and undocumented immigrants. Reports mention efforts to detain persons believed to be in the U.S. illegally as part of an immigration law enforcement, criminal investigations and arrests related to immigration and associated offenses. Now, the operation has involved multiple DHS law enforcement components, including U.S. Customs and Border Protection, especially Border Patrol agents brought in to augment enforcement capacity, U.S. Immigration and Customs Enforcement, mainly involved in detentions, arrests, and deportations. And there's been other DHS enforcement units. Now, this operation in Minneapolis has been usually large for an interior city, because reports indicate thousands of federal agents were deployed to the Twin Cities over recent weeks under this operation. This also included arrest of undocumented individuals and other enforcement actions that have drawn significant protest and scrutiny. Why Minneapolis, you ask? Well, Minnesota became a focal point of this enforcement surge after high-profile immigration cases and allegations around fraud and criminal activity, according to the statements tied to federal enforcement priorities. However, though, local officials and critics have been pushed back, arguing that the presence of immigration agents is too heavy-handed and not appropriate for the community. And that's what has led to this confrontation with residents and law enforcement. But throughout this whole Operation Metro Surge, CBP and other federal agents were in Minneapolis as part of a large immigration enforcement initiative authorized by the federal government, aimed at arresting and deporting undocumented immigrants and enforcing immigrations and related law under this operation. Their presence, again, was not a routine local police deployment, but part of a national federal enforcement campaign that has been controversial and has been met with local resistance. Some will even say nationwide. Now, you may ask, what does President Trump have to say about this? So, his immediate response was a strong protection and defense of these federal agents. Of course, he responded on his Truth Social, defending ICE and the other federal agents that's been in this city, saying essentially, let ICE do their job. In Minneapolis, following this fatal shooting of Alex Preddy, this frames the enforcement operation and the agent's action as legitimate and necessary, according to Trump. He has criticized Minnesota's Democratic leadership, including Governor Tim Walz and Minneapolis Mayor Jacob Frey. And he has accused them of inciting unrest and even insurrection by opposing federal law enforcement presence in the city. Does that sound familiar? And quite ironic that's coming from him. But you see, this reflects broader tension between the federal administration and local officials, which is over this topic of immigration enforcement. Now, according to sources, Trump was briefed on the shooting through though investigations are ongoing and no complete report has been released yet. The top White House advisors like Stephen Miller have echoed the administration framing suggestion that Preddy was a would-be assassin, though evidence for that claim has not been documented or acknowledged to anyone. It seems to be that Trump has the same persona as it was with Renee Good. What we can see that he has not done yet, that Trump has not called for the officer involved to be charged or removed. As far as we can see and have read, statements emphasize his support of this agent, and there has been no accountability taken for him. There is no federal indictment, there is no arrest to be announced. And Trump seems to be on the defense of protecting this agent rather than asking him to be accountable. And I quote, we see here in this statement from President Trump on his Truth Social, where he says the mayor and governor are inciting insurrection with their pompous, dangerous, and arrogant rhetoric. Instead, these sanctimonious political fools should be looking for the billions of dollars that has been stolen from the people of Minnesota and the United States of America. Let our ICE patriots do their job. Where 12,000 illegal alien criminals, many of them violent, have been arrested and taken out of Minnesota. If they were still there, you would see something far worse than you are witnessing today. You see here, he attacks Minnesota leaders and he's accusing them of inciting insurrection. Now, again, irony. I'll just leave that there. On the flip side, here's the latest statements from Minneapolis's mayor and Minnesota governor regarding this failed shooting of Alex Preddy by federal agents. From Mayor Fry, he had a strong condemnation and a call to end federal operation. Mayor Fry, he issued a forceful public response after videos and reports circulated showing federal agents tackling and fatally shooting Alex Preddy. His exact remarks condemned the federal operation, and I quote, he says, "More than 6 masked agents pummeled one of our constituents and shooting him to death." He asked pointedly, how many more residents, how many more Americans need to die for this operation to end? He criticizes the federal deployment as prioritizing politics over public safety and community trust, urging that he needs this operation to immediately end. He's called on national solidarity with Minneapolis and urged federal authorities to respect local governance and safety. Now, from Governor Tim Walz, he responded publicly, sharply criticizing the federal presence, and he promising state action. His statements included calling the situation a federal occupation and saying the deployment has long ceased being solely immigration enforcement. Instead, it has now become harmful to Minnesotans. Describing this shooting as sickening and urging full accountability and transparency. He also states that Minnesota will investigate this fatal shooting locally and is compiling documentation that could be used to pursue charges. He announced activation of the National Guard of Minnesota, which will provide support and security amid protests and unrest. He called on Donald Trump's administration to end this federal operation, saying that state residents have had it with the current situation. His remarks reflect deep frustration with federal control over the investigation, and he pushed to assert state authority over how much incidents are handled going forward. Now, as you can see, context from both leaders, they asked for accountability and transparency straight off the rip from this. They both demanded federal forces to withdraw and discontinue this operation. And they consistently support the community for safety and de-escalation rather than militarized enforcement. To me, it seems like they want diplomacy. To me, it seems like the governor and the mayor wants this to be handled quickly, efficiently. Now, let's address the pushback head on, because I already know what some people are saying. This sounds like anti-law enforcement. You're undermining federal agents. If you were doing anything wrong, you wouldn't get shot. Well, let's slow down for a minute. Let's talk about the first one. Criticism equals anti-law enforcement. No, actually, criticism equals accountability. Supporting law enforcement does not mean defending every action without question. If that were true, then there would be no internal affairs, there would be no court system, and there would not be no use of force standards. Accountability protects good officers by separating them from the bad decisions. Blind loyalty protects misconduct. Rebuttal number 2. Federal agents seem to have to make split-second decisions. While that may be true, and it's exactly why the standard is higher, we don't lower constitutional protections because decisions are hard. We raise training, transparency, and scrutiny because the consequences are permanent. Split-second decisions do not cancel the Fourth Amendment. They are judged by. Another rebuttal is, if someone is armed, officers can shoot. Now, this one matters, y'all, because we saw what happened today. Being armed is not the same as being an imminent threat. Especially in a country where lawful firearm ownership exists. The Constitution does not say you may use deadly force if a weapon exists. It says deadly force must be necessary to stop an imminent threat. If simply being armed were enough, then constitutional rights would disappear the moment someone exercises the Second Amendment. Now, another rebuttal that some of you so tragically believe is the federal government knows more than the public. Then transparency should be easy in my opinion. If the actions were justified, please show the evidence. Allow independent review and cooperate with the state. Secrecy does not build confidence, y'all. It creates suspicion. Authority that refuses oversight doesn't look strong. It looks afraid. Talking about this causes unrest. No, violence causes unrest. History has shown us that unrest grows when people feel unheard, unseen, and powerless. And that's when they ask questions. Truth calms the chaos, y'all. Transparency stabilizes the community. Accountability prevents repeat harm. The final debate point, what this really is. This conversation isn't anti-law enforcement. It is pro-constitution. It is pro-life. And it's pro-trust. You don't weaken institutions by demanding integrity. That's how you strengthen them. And if an institution cannot survive accountability, then accountability isn't the threat. That institution is. Now here's the culture check. When federal agents overstep, they don't just violate policy. They fracture the social contract. They cannot govern by fear. They cannot enforce by secrecy. And you cannot preserve order while eroding trust. If federal agencies want legitimacy, they must earn it every single day through restraint, transparency, and accountability. Because once the people stops trusting the badge, no amount of authority can replace what's been lost. Now, this has been the Breaking Culture Check, y'all. We'll continue following this story as facts emerge, not narratives, not spins, but truth. Always remember, stay informed, stay grounded, and never stop asking who power is accountable to. Peace.